Hi, everyone. This is acyuta-bhava from Nightlight Astrology. Today, I'm hanging out with my friend Kat from the Creative Introvert. Kat helps me with my social media platforms and aggregates questions from all of you throughout the year, and then we do these fun Q&A episodes. So I'm very glad to have Kat here again today for another Q&A episode. But before I dive in, I want to remind you all that I am in the last 40 days of the year, which means I'm fundraising to support my work in the year ahead. We are trying to gather the support of 691 backers to beat last year's record of 690. So just seeing if we can see if we can break that record by the new year. We're getting closer. We're a little over 100 more backers away from breaking last year's record. When you pitch in and donate, you can find the link in the comment section of this video. When you pitch in and donate, you can pick up a reward, a gift reading, or even half off tuition to some of my classes. So check that out. And thank you very much for supporting me. I really appreciate it. So I'm really glad to have you here today, Kat. What are we talking about today?
Today we're going to be talking about how to get the most out of a horoscope. And so I guess the first place to start is just to kind of get everyone up to speed, like what is a horoscope and maybe, what goes into creating one to help people
Mhm.
understand.
Yeah. So basically, a horoscope is like a sun sign horoscope or a rising sign horoscope um, is going to be for the week ahead, the day ahead, the month ahead, the year ahead, some unit of time. And they're made in order to offer forecasting for massive amounts of people at once. Whereas the astrologer might otherwise be limited by having to only look at one chart at a time, one client at a time. The specifics of a birth chart and transits in the sky and how they correlate to that birth chart, activating different things at different times in a person's life. You see an astrologer for that. They need time and research to analyze and break that down for you. It's like karmic, very personalized form of weather forecasting, and it's really the best. But astrologers, especially in the modern era, have created essentially the equivalent of a forecast reading for massive amounts of people all at once through what are called sun sign horoscopes or rising sign horoscopes. Let me just give you an example of what one looks like, so that'll be a little easier to actually show. Here's the real-time clock. So let's just imagine that I've got you've got Libra rising, or you can put the sun sign on the ascendant and read as though the sun sign is the first house, in which case you'd be a Libra sun. And what I'm doing is I'm looking at the transits for the month. I'm tracking the movements of the planets through the chart, which is configured by whole sign houses to Libra on the ascendant. So as the planets move through the houses and make aspects to each other and so forth, what I'm doing is I'm saying for everybody whose chart is configured in the same way with Libra rising, which puts all of the whole sign houses in exactly the same place. This only really works by whole sign houses. It's not going to work if you use Placidus or something else. But I'm going to trace and track those movements. And because I can see which planets are aspecting which and in which houses, I can come up with predictions. Okay, so for example, let's say the sun in this chart is about to make a trine from 19 degrees of Sagittarius to 19 degrees Mars in Aries in the seventh house. So I'm looking at this and I'm saying, oh, look, that happens on December 11th. So on December 11th, I'm going to say Sun in the third in Sagittarius, trines Mars in Aries in the seventh. This is a replica of your birth chart if you're a Libra rising. And so I'm plugging that transit into the same layout as your birth chart and then making a prediction based on that aspect. Maybe there will be a more fiery level of communication about ideas or beliefs. fiery communication in relationships, which may be a little confrontational, but overall should be harmonious and productive because we're talking about a trine. That will happen for you on December 11th this month if you're a Libra rising. And then I'm doing that day by day for the whole month and choosing not all transits, but usually the ones that I think are going to be the most impactful. And then writing a kind of day by day, or, selecting the highlights and telling people, if you're a Libra rising, here's what to expect this month. Now, the sun sign horoscope, I'm doing the exact same thing, but instead of it looking just like your birth chart, which is what you would do if you chose a rising sign horoscope, you're now choosing, if this is your chart, it would be, if you're a Libra sun, you would be taking Libra and putting it on the ascendant. Now, unless you're a Libra rising and Libra sun sign, this is not going to look like your birth chart. In which case, it's a mode of divination. It's not anchored in your birth chart. It's anchored in putting your sun symbolically into the first house of the chart. This is something that modern astrologers have done in the advent of sun sign astrology, which has grown really, really popular. So that's the difference between the two. Sometimes people will use a moon horoscope, in which case they would put the moon sign on the rising. So let's say this is your chart, right? Let's say this was your birth chart. If you wanted to do a horoscope for the month for your moon sign, you would be reading for Scorpio, because Scorpio, you'd put your moon on the ascendant. And then everything that's being read is being read as though the moon is occupying the first house. And you're doing that with the sun too. If you were a Sagittarius, you're like, well, I'd like to read for my sun sign horoscope. Well, then you're reading a chart that has Sagittarius on the ascendant. And all the transits would be read in that light. So when the sun trines Mars, now you're reading the sun in the first, trine Mars in the fifth. Different topics that are going to come up if you're reading in that way. The reason that I prefer rising sign horoscopes is because it correlates with what your chart actually looks like. It's like a 1-to-1. This is exactly what your chart looks like. Remember, it's what your chart looks like in whole signs, no matter what method you're using. So that's the basics of the different approaches. Does that make sense, Kat?
It does, yeah.
Okay.
So let's say somebody has just watched your month ahead forecast horoscope for their rising sign. They've given it a thumbs up, a like. What do you want them to do next? Like, what would your recommendation be?
In terms of getting the most out of it for the month ahead, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So what I would recommend is don't just listen to it once and get elated or depressed, because that's what people often tend to do. Is like, ooh, it sounds like it's a good month. Yay. Or, ooh, it sounds like it might be a little dicey. Oh man, bummer.
All of 2020.
Yeah, exactly. So, so instead, what I really recommend is coming back to the transits as the month goes on, and spending time with them. Okay, so in other words, once you have a video like something that I produce at the beginning of the month, which is not always going to be 100% accurate, or I may not focus on the things that end up becoming the most important or whatever, but come back and re-listen to that several times throughout the month and track what you're experiencing, because otherwise it's just kind of meaningless content. It's like entertainment value, and that's it. If you really want to grow, the underlying idea behind all of this, at least one of them, is to become more sensitive to the movements of the planets so that we can move more intelligently along with the different seasons that they reflect, whether it's the season of a day or a week or a month or a year. You can't do that if you're not following up and paying attention to what actually happened, and how the symbols spoke during the transits that the monthly forecast predicts. And the best forecasts, in my opinion, are those that don't just tell you what's going to happen, but give you the skeleton key. These are the planets combining. Here's their likely combinations. So that way, when you go back, you can also modify or adjust. What I say as an astrologer is a set of, educated guesses, because I know how to combine the planets in the houses and so forth. But if you go back and listen, let's say a transit is predicted for December 11th, Mars trine the sun or whatever it's going to be. I would recommend just living that experience. Don't obsess over it while you're in it, but maybe on the 13th or the 14th, come back and say what just happened over the last few days. If you keep a journal, something that I did for several years when I was first learning how to do this, and just note anything that stands out as a theme of the day or as events in the day or whatever. And then you track those transits and re-listen to the horoscopes that you like around the dates and times. And if you're tracking them like that, you are going to start developing like an internal GPS that's really, really special. It's a really beautiful thing to have as an ally in life. You can't really do that if you don't track and follow up with the transits. That's my experience anyway.
Yeah, a friend recently described a journal as like an operation manual of you. And especially when you combine it with astrology, that's like saying over time, this is how, over time I've experienced these Mars transits or whatever, which could be a great, learning tool.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
What are your thoughts on maybe for people who maybe a little more advanced, but they have a copy of their own birth chart, in terms of just like lining up the planets that you're describing that are transiting through the sky right now and in the month ahead, lining that up with their own chart?
Yeah, I mean, that's
something?
tracking the transits in terms of how the transits are aspecting planets in your natal chart or passing over important angles in your natal chart. A monthly horoscope can't do that for you. Only an astrologer or you, the student, can, or a practitioner can do that. It's really valuable. I always tell people, focus on signal, avoid static. So I would say don't obsess over every last aspect in your chart. Focus on slower moving planets, retrogrades, eclipses, full moons. I mean, kind of try to narrow it down to the big stuff, because one thing that can get very overwhelming is that a person thinks, well, I've got to track all of this and I've got to make sense of all of it. And um, it's almost like, you don't need to flip a tarot card every new hour of the day. You don't need to cast a spread for every, if you cast a new tarot spread, like what's going to happen every 2 hours of the day, you just get really overwhelmed and this symbols would lose their coherency. So I think it's similar with tracking transits. It's like, track some, but not all, or just manage the symbolic load that you're taking into your head somehow so it doesn't get overwhelming.
Cool. Yeah. And speaking of overwhelming, do you think there are any limitations, maybe problems that come up when people are, listening to or reading their monthly horoscope or weekly? Whatever.
Yeah, I mean, the number one thing is that you forget, it's easy to assign like clairvoyant authority and, insight to astrologers, but astrologers are just people who understand the nature of the symbols, the timing of their interactions, the most likely themes or combinations of themes that are going to occur at different times. But that doesn't mean that they're that they always focus on the themes that will be actually end up being most prominent or important to each individual, especially with broad forecasts like a monthly horoscope. And the thing that I think we have to really be careful of are the astrologers out there that are spinning narratives about we're all experiencing the same story with these energies, and here it is. We're all going through this, or it's been like this, or it's been like that. I think, remember that your story is unique and you don't need to feel like you're on some kind of collective roller coaster ride that's everyone's experiencing in the exact same way. We're all going through some kind of shift, or each soul meets the karmic weather really differently. And it's almost equally important that that each person meet the astrological transit with presence and, integrity and heart, than it is to just like assume that you're sort of a passive agent along for some kind of ride. Oh gosh, Saturn's messing. We fall into that sometimes with horoscopes too. Like, oh gosh, Mars is really like just so volatile this month, and et cetera, et cetera. It's like, well, I think again, I always use the analogy of tarot. Like the cards aren't volatile. Like you're not being like, oh my gosh, like the page of Pentacles is so volatile this month, or whatever the case might be. It's like they're just symbols. they're symbols that represent such a vast array of different forces and events and themes. And so just remember that your consciousness and you participate in it. You are part of creating what the transit will be. So somewhere between awareness of what's likely to occur, openness to things happening that the astrologer may not be able to completely cover, and participating in making something of the transit on your own, you can avoid falling into feeling just kind of like a passive victim on some kind of cosmic roller coaster ride, or you can avoid feeling like you're trapped by only what the astrologer is saying or expressing in a horoscope, because there's probably a lot of other possibilities that you can't, astrologer can't possibly cover all of the different possibilities that could occur, especially when they're not able to also see an individual's birth chart. So that's sort of the downside of these big mass, monthly horoscopes.
Yeah, it's definitely something that's helped me, is just over time learning that it's not always going to be the upper end extremity of what the astrologer is saying. These are useful guides, basically.
Yeah, they're useful. And it's like, for example, like Venus opposite Uranus, that transit just happened. And I did a whole video or two on all the different combinations of what could occur and so on. And one of the things that I said was, the need for independence in love. And sometimes that will manifest in breakups, but for couples that are fine, like it's not going to probably not going to manifest in a breakup. If you're happy and you're fine, it's just another 2 days in life, So how did that show up in my marriage, for example? Well, my wife and I talked about, well, would we ever want to have a third child or not? And both of us were like, the freedom and independence that we want to be able to have, and the thought of a third kid for us was like, probably, you know what I mean? It was like, that's not going to work. But it was not, there was no, one of the themes that you'll hear a lot of astrologers talking about is that suddenly one partner will want to break free and have an affair and, break off the relationship or whatever. So that was a very simple manifestation. It was like a 2-hour long talk that we had in the evening after the kids were in bed, talking about if we ever would want to have a third kid. And no, we both prioritize having a little bit more time and space. And that was the Venus Uranus transit. And if I was sitting back and freaking out because an astrologer had said, that these really intense Venus Uranus things were going to happen, and I didn't have a range of possible. That's why I think it's so important. That's why I spend so much time in my horoscopes and my forecasts helping people understand a wide variety of themes that can show up. And sometimes they literally just show up for like 2 or 3 hours. It's not always a big deal. And part of how you could determine if it's going to be a big deal or not is by understanding what's actually going on in the specifics of your birth chart, which, a monthly horoscope can't do.
Yeah, and a lot of it just sounds like common sense. A video you recorded recently talking about, I think you were looking at your mum's chart, and a lot of it was just, well, common sense tells you that this thing probably won't happen because this about her life.
Right.
Right. So it's taking those things into context with our own lives. What's likely, what's less likely.
That's exactly right. I mean, we're like educated karmic weathermen. I'm in Minnesota in the middle of January. If we're seeing, a warm front that's coming on, it's probably in the middle of January, not going to be a warm front that gets us up to 70. It might get us up to 50 or something like that. So similarly, like, the Neptune Venus transit in my mom's chart, she's in a happy relationship. Not likely it's going to be one of those big things where there's tons of deception and undoing. Like, it's probably going to be something else. Well, her and her partner both got sick together. So you can, and this is why also in readings with people, an astrologer doesn't just sit there and predict, like trying to hit the bullseye with one dart. We're asking questions about the context. Like if I have a 90-minute reading, it's possible that 20 or 30 minutes of that reading might be me asking questions about the person's life in different areas, so that understanding the context, I can hone the prediction more specifically.
Yeah, that was a helpful thing for me to learn as well. Like, the astrologer isn't there to just do a magic trick of figuring out somebody's past, present, and future. It's really to help, go a lot deeper, and a lot of that requires asking questions and talking about that stuff.
Yeah, and that's where the session can also take on a dimension of counseling, and not, maybe a lot of astrologers aren't going to be like professional therapists, but the astrologer, just like a yoga teacher, will often, be someone in bringing these things up, asking questions to gain contextual understanding to make a better forecast. You're going to get into meaningful conversations with people that empower them, and that's a win-win for everybody. And that doesn't, so if you're not sitting there making a prediction every second of a reading, doesn't mean you're a bad astrologer. Some people think that, so.
All right, thank you. I think those are all my questions on that today.
Awesome. Well, thank you everybody for listening. Please check Kat's work out at thecreativeintrovert.com. And also, if you haven't yet, I appreciate your support with my Kickstarter. We are, like I said, we're just a little over 100 right now is the time of recording this. We're about 100 away from 691, so hoping to get there soon. And when you do so, you can pick up any number of different rewards that I offer. And this work, this Kickstarter supports small staff of people, including Kat, including Delia, a personal assistant that I work with, a woman named Nanise that works with us. So it's a full operation that happens all year round. You're supporting, astrology in the world as an everyday part of life. There's no institutions or companies out there that support us. We're pretty much on our own. So we rely on the people who really like the content to help it grow and to help see astrology itself, flourish as an industry for professionals. So thank you all very much for supporting me, and look forward to more soon. Take it easy, everyone.